Bullies swarmed into the upscale restaurant like a pack of wolves that had caught the scent of vulnerability. Their expensive clothes and confident swagger couldn't mask their predatory nature as their eyes locked onto Michael Carson, sitting in the corner booth with his wife. It was the limp that drew their attention first, the way he had struggled to make his way to his seat earlier, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. Then there was the scar, a jagged line that ran from his right temple down to his jawline, visible even in the restaurant's dim, romantic lighting. Emma Carson had been mid-sentence, telling Michael about her day at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade, when she noticed his attention drift over her shoulder. The slight tightening around his eyes was all the indication he gave that something was wrong. But after 15 years of marriage, it was enough for her to sense the shift. She reached across the white tablecloth and placed her hand over his. "Everything okay?" she asked. But before Michael could answer, a shadow fell across their table. "Well, look what we have here," said a voice that carried the artificial refinement of new money and expensive schooling poorly masking cruder origins. "What happened to you, buddy? Motorcycle accident? Or were you born that way?" The speaker was a tall man in his 30s with expertly styled hair and a custom-tailored suit. Behind him stood 4 others, all wearing similar expressions of mock concern that couldn't hide their malicious amusement. They had come from the bar area, their drinks in hand suggesting they were already several rounds in. Michael straightened in his seat but didn't respond. His weathered hands remained steady as he folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate. Years of discipline kept his expression neutral, though Emma could see the muscle in his jaw working. "It's our anniversary," Emma said firmly, her tone making it clear they wanted to be left alone. One of the other men, shorter but broader across the shoulders, leaned in. "Anniversary, huh? How sweet. Tell me, sweetheart, what's it like being married to a guy who looks like he lost a fight with a lawnmower?" The comment drew snickers from the group. Nearby diners were beginning to notice the confrontation, some watching with uncomfortable expressions, others deliberately looking away. A server hovered uncertainly several feet away, clearly unsure whether to intervene. "Please leave us alone," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying no hint of the anger Emma knew he must be feeling. "We're just trying to enjoy our dinner." "Oh, it speaks," the first man exclaimed, raising his glass in a mock toast. "And here I thought maybe whatever messed up your face got your tongue too." Emma's cheeks flushed with anger. "That's enough. Please go back to your table." The third man, who had remained silent until now, placed his hand on the back of Michael's chair, leaning in uncomfortably close. "Hey, Gimpy, my buddy asked you a question. What happened to your face? Run into a door? Or did your pretty wife here do that when she found out what she'd married?" The restaurant had grown quieter now, the uncomfortable spectacle drawing unwanted attention. Emma's eyes had welled with tears, not of shame but of fury at the injustice of it all. 15 years they'd been married. 15 years since she'd fallen in love with the quiet, strong man who'd returned from war carrying visible and invisible scars. Not once had she seen him use his size or training to intimidate anyone, even when provoked. "I think the freak show's in town," the shorter bully jeered, reaching over to knock Michael's cane to the floor with a deliberate swipe. The polished wood clattered against the tile. "Bet your wife wishes she married a whole man." Emma started to rise, her patience finally snapping, but Michael's hand on hers kept her seated. His expression remained calm, almost detached, as if he were observing the situation from a distance rather than experiencing it directly. "Don't," he murmured to her. "They're not worth it." The restraint only seemed to encourage the bullies. The fourth man, who had been filming the encounter on his phone, laughed. "This is gold. Absolute gold. Wait till this hits social media. Watch this cripple cower while we roast him in front of his wife." Several diners at nearby tables had begun to murmur in disapproval, but none had yet intervened. The restaurant manager was approaching now, his face a mask of professional concern as he navigated between tables. "Look at him just sitting there taking it," the leader said, his voice rising to ensure others could hear. "What kind of man just sits there while his wife has to defend him? Stand up, if you can even manage that." Michael remained seated, his eyes now fixed on a point in the middle distance. Emma recognized the look. He wasn't afraid or intimidated. He was controlling himself, going to the place in his mind that had kept him alive in situations far more dangerous than this. "He can't even look us in the eye," the third man said, nudging his friend. "Probably ashamed his wife has to see what a coward he is." The manager finally reached their table. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seats or leave the establishment. We don't tolerate harassment of our customers." The leader turned his attention to the manager, a man several inches shorter and at least 20 years older. "We're just having a friendly conversation. Right, Gimpy?" "Sir, I must insist." The manager began but was cut off. "You insist? Do you know who I am?" The bully pulled out a business card and thrust it at the manager. "Jason Merrick. My father owns half the commercial property in this district, including the building your little restaurant leases. So why don't you go back to your hostess station and let the adults talk?" The manager paled, glancing at the card and then back at Michael and Emma, trapped in an impossible position between protecting his customers and potentially losing the restaurant's lease. His hesitation was all the confirmation the bullies needed that their intimidation had worked. "That's what I thought," Merrick said, pocketing the card again. "Now, where were we? Oh right, we were discussing how this poor woman ended up with damaged goods." Emma's knuckles had gone white around her water glass. "Michael is twice the man any of you will ever be." "Michael?" the shorter bully repeated with exaggerated interest. "So the creature has a name. Michael the Cripple. Has a ring to it, doesn't it?" Through it all, Michael remained silent, his breathing steady and controlled. To anyone who didn't know him, he might have appeared defeated or resigned. But Emma could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the careful assessment of the situation that had kept him and his men alive in war zones. "What's wrong, Michael?" Merrick taunted, leaning in closer. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just used to letting your wife fight your battles while you hide behind her skirts?" The fifth member of the group, who had been relatively quiet until now, suddenly grabbed the back of Michael's chair and yanked it backward, nearly toppling it before Michael caught himself. The sudden movement sent a jolt of pain through his damaged leg, and for the first time, a grimace broke through his composed facade. "Oh, did that hurt?" the man asked with mock concern. "Sorry about that. Must be tough being so fragile." The restaurant had fallen completely silent now, the uncomfortable spectacle holding everyone's attention. Emma could see several people on their phones, possibly calling security or even police, but no one was stepping forward to help. The bullies had created a bubble of intimidation that no one seemed willing to pierce. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now, the uncomfortable spectacle holding everyone's attention. Emma could see several people on their phones, possibly calling security or even police, but no one was stepping forward to help. The bullies had created a bubble of intimidation that no one seemed willing to pierce. Nunasurser equals the restaurant had fallen completely silent now, the uncomfortable spectacle holding everyone's attention. Emma could see several people on their phones, possibly calling security or even police, but no one was stepping forward to help. The bullies had created a bubble of intimidation that no one seemed willing to pierce. Then a chair scraped back from a table near the window. An older man with silver hair and ramrod-straight posture rose to his feet. Even in his mid-60s and dressed in civilian clothes, a crisp blue button-down and khakis, there was no mistaking the military bearing that had been ingrained through decades of service. "That's enough," he said, his voice not particularly loud but carrying the unmistakable tone of command that made everyone in the restaurant turn to look. He walked deliberately toward Michael's table, his gait measured and purposeful. Merrick turned, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you." The older gentleman ignored him completely, moving to stand beside Michael's chair. He looked down at the cane on the floor, then bent to retrieve it with a fluid motion that belied his age. As he straightened, he placed the cane gently on the table and then turned to face the group of bullies. "Lieutenant Colonel Michael Carson," he said, addressing not the bullies but the restaurant at large. 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. A murmur ran through the restaurant. Merrick's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. So what? We're supposed to be impressed by Purple Heart. The older man continued as if Merrick hadn't spoken. Bronze Star with Valor. Distinguished Service Cross. The shorter bully shifted uncomfortably, his eyes now taking in Michael's rigid posture and controlled breathing with new understanding. The man with the phone had stopped filming. That limp you've been mocking? The older man said, his voice taking on an edge of controlled anger. He got it pulling 3 of his men from a burning Humvee after an IED strike outside Kandahar. The explosion shattered his right femur and damaged his knee beyond full repair. That scar on his face. Shrapnel from the same explosion that killed 2 members of his squad. Emma reached across the table and took Michael's hand. His eyes met hers briefly, a silent communication passing between them. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted his service or his injuries to be turned into a spectacle. But now that it was happening, he would face it with the same dignity he faced everything else. After the initial blast, the older man continued, despite his injuries, Lieutenant Colonel Carson organized a defensive perimeter and coordinated fire against insurgents who were attempting to advance on their position. For 12 hours, he led his surviving men in a fight against superior numbers while waiting for medevac to arrive. His actions that day saved 17 American lives. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Several veterans among the diners had risen to their feet in silent respect. The manager, who had been hovering uncertainly throughout the confrontation, now stood straighter, his earlier hesitation replaced by resolution. "I know all this," the older man said, turning to look directly at Merrick for the first time, "because I was his commanding officer, and I owe him my life." Merrick's arrogance had drained away, leaving him looking like the schoolyard bully he essentially was, powerful only when unopposed, diminished when confronted with true courage. "Sir, we didn't know," he managed, his voice barely audible. The older man's expression hardened. "That's the point, isn't it? You never bothered to find out who he was before you decided to humiliate him. You saw his injuries and assumed weakness. In my experience, men like you who derive pleasure from the suffering of others are the truly weak ones." Michael finally spoke, his voice calm and measured despite everything that had happened. "That's enough, Colonel Matthews. They understand." Colonel Matthews looked down at Michael with undisguised respect. "They damn well better, son." The man who had been filming stepped forward, his phone now tucked away. "I want to apologize, sir. What we did was... There's no excuse." Michael regarded him steadily. "No, there isn't. We were just having some fun," Merrick said, a last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "It got out of hand." "Fun," Emma said, speaking for the first time since the revelation. "You call humiliating someone for their physical appearance fun? My husband sacrificed his body serving this country, protecting the freedoms that allow even people like you to live in peace. And you thought it was entertaining to mock him for it." Several other diners were nodding in agreement, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifting from uncomfortable tension to unified support for Michael and Emma. "The thing about my husband," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it, "is that he never uses his service or his injuries to gain special treatment. He never asks for recognition or praise. He did his duty because he believed it was right, not because he wanted accolades." Michael squeezed her hand, a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth, the first sign of emotion he had shown throughout the entire confrontation. Colonel Matthews turned to address the entire restaurant. "This is what a hero looks like, folks. Not someone seeking glory or recognition, but someone who quietly does what needs to be done, no matter the personal cost." An older woman at a nearby table stood up and began to applaud. Within seconds, the entire restaurant had joined in, a spontaneous standing ovation that brought tears to Emma's eyes. Michael, typically uncomfortable with attention, accepted it with a small nod of acknowledgement. The bullies stood awkwardly in the midst of it all, their earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of the truth about the man they had targeted. The bullies stood awkwardly in the midst of it all. Their earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of the truth about the man they had targeted. New underscore equals the bullies stood awkwardly in the midst of it all. Their earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of the truth about the man they had targeted. As the applause finally died down, the restaurant manager approached their table again, this time with renewed confidence. Lieutenant Colonel Carson, Mrs. Carson, please allow the restaurant to cover your meal tonight. It's the least we can do to thank you for your service. Michael shook his head slightly. That's not necessary. We came here to celebrate our anniversary, just like any other couple. Then at least allow me to move you to our private dining area where you can finish your evening in peace, the manager insisted. Before Michael could respond, Merrick stepped forward. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by something that, if not genuine remorse, at least resembled shame. Wait, he said, his voice subdued. Before you go. He pulled out his wallet and extracted several $100 bills. Let me cover their meal. Michael regarded him coolly. Keep your money, Mr. Merrick. I don't want it. Merrick faltered, clearly unaccustomed to having his money refused. Please, I insist. It's the least I can do. The least you can do? Michael repeated quietly. No, I think the least you can do is better than this. He reached for his cane and stood up slowly. His movements deliberate and controlled despite the pain Emma knew he must be feeling after sitting so long. At his full height, he was an imposing figure, his shoulders broad and his posture military straight despite his injured leg. If you truly want to make amends, Michael said, there's a VA hospital 10 miles from here. They're always looking for volunteers. Or the Wounded Warrior Project could use donations that actually help veterans in need, not just ease your conscience. Emma stood beside him, linking her arm through his with pride evident in her every movement. And the next time you see someone with scars or a disability, Michael continued, remember they might have earned them saving people like you, or they might be fighting battles you know nothing about. Either way, they deserve your respect, not your mockery. The shorter bully who had knocked over Michael's cane stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, I'd like to know more about those organizations you mentioned. Maybe we could. I'd like to help somehow. Something in the young man's expression suggested a genuine desire to make amends, unlike Merrick's transparent attempt to buy his way out of the situation. Michael studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and produced a business card. I work with several veteran support groups. Come by my office next week if you're serious. The young man took the card with a nod, tucking it carefully into his pocket. Colonel Matthews, who had been watching the exchange with approval, turned to Merrick. As for you, young man, I believe I know your father. Harrison Merrick, correct? We serve on the board of the City Memorial Hospital Foundation together. Merrick paled visibly. Yes, sir. I think he would be interested to hear about your behavior tonight, the colonel continued. Not as a threat, you understand, but as an opportunity for growth. A man should know who his son truly is. That won't be necessary, Michael interjected, surprising everyone. What's done is done. I'd rather move forward than dwell on tonight's unpleasantness. Emma squeezed his arm, understanding his decision. Michael had never been one to seek revenge or hold grudges. It was one of the qualities that had allowed him to return from war with his humanity intact, despite everything he had witnessed and endured. You're a better man than I am, Carson, Colonel Matthews said with a slight smile. Always were. The restaurant manager, sensing the confrontation had reached its conclusion, stepped forward again. Your table in the private dining room is ready whenever you are, sir. Michael nodded his thanks. As they prepared to follow the manager, several other diners approached to shake Michael's hand or offer quiet words of appreciation for his service. He accepted their gratitude with humble grace, never one to seek the spotlight but understanding what his story meant to others. The bullies watched this procession with varying expressions of shame and discomfort. The fifth member of their group, who had been relatively quiet throughout the confrontation, suddenly broke away from his friends and approached Michael. Sir, he said hesitantly, my brother is in the Marines, deployed to Somalia right now. I should have known better tonight. What we did. What I did. It dishonors him and everyone who serves. I'm truly sorry. Michael's expression softened slightly. Then honor him by being the kind of person he'd be proud to call brother. That's all any of us can do. As Michael and Emma followed the manager to their private table, the restaurant burst into another round of spontaneous applause. This time, Michael acknowledged it with a small salute that brought tears to the eyes of several veterans in the crowd. In the private dining room, once they were finally alone, Emma reached across the table and took both of his hands in hers. "You amaze me," she said softly. "After everything they said and did, you still showed them compassion." Michael shrugged slightly. "Holding on to anger only hurts yourself in the end. I learned that the hard way." He squeezed her hands. "Besides, this night isn't about them. It's about us. 15 years, Em. That's worth celebrating." Emma smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'd marry you again tomorrow, scars and all." "I know you would," he said, a rare smile lighting his face. "That's why I love you." They continued their anniversary dinner in peace, the unpleasant confrontation already fading into the background. Outside in the main dining room, the 5 young men who had arrived as thoughtless bullies left the restaurant changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. And in the days that followed, true to his word, the younger man appeared at Michael's office, ready to volunteer. The VA hospital received an anonymous donation large enough to refurbish their physical therapy wing. And at the next meeting of the City Memorial Hospital Foundation Board, Harrison Merrick pulled Colonel Matthews aside to thank him for the wake-up call his son had needed. Sometimes lessons come in unexpected ways, and sometimes heroes were their greatest strength not in their medals or their scars, but in their capacity for forgiveness.